Okay, so I have decided to officially pull myself out of retirement to analyze the downfall of Sydney Sweeney with you guys because, respectfully, I think almost all of you have completely missed the point. And if by the end of my video I don't convince you beyond a shadow of doubt that this was clearly a case of intentional psychological manipulation that most of you fell for, I will be shaving my head live on camera tomorrow. So I want to start by establishing some very important context that I haven't heard a lot of people mention yet. And this is the fact that in the weeks leading up to this very controversial campaign, JP Morgan was actually preparing to downgrade the American Eagle stock to a classification called underweight. What this means is the stock was not performing, nobody was buying it, their inventory was through the roof, they weren't selling products, and let's be honest, they have very much declined in cultural relevancy recently. So in other words, the American Eagle executives were completely panicking because this was an existential crisis, and at the end of the day, when shit's about to hit the fan, you can't just change your financial fundamentals overnight. But what you can change is the narrative. So when you're a company that's going down the shitter like American Eagle was, and you're cornered and you're out of options, the only real card that's left to play is narrative arbitrage. And this refers to leveraging cultural volatility in order to manufacture temporary financial momentum. So it is incredibly obvious to me that this was not about revenue, this was not about brand loyalty, this was not about appealing to their target demographic. This was about intentionally weaponizing attention in order to trick the financial markets into thinking something big was happening, even though it wasn't. And at the center of this master plan was, of course, the infamous Sydney Sweeney. So the selection of Sydney Sweeney for this campaign was very intentional and very methodical. She is someone that I like to call a chaos mascot. She was not chosen because she is universally loved. She's not. She was not chosen because she is politically safe. She's not. She was chosen because of her ability to spark cultural discourse and volatility, which is currently the currency of this new attention economy that we live in. So Sydney Sweeney is so specific and so unique in her ability to spark emotional reactions in people. And I think the reason for this is because she embodies this nostalgic 1950s femininity that feels very unsettling to the modern woman in 2025, particularly when it's filtered through the lens of conservative aesthetics and Americana. So when the hundreds of employees at American Eagle were putting together this multi-million-dollar campaign that they absolutely knew would be controversial, please, they were not thinking about denim. They were thinking about detonating a conversation and using Miss Sydney Sweeney as the sacrificial lamb to do it. So American Eagle was smart enough to perfectly calibrate the ad to ensure that it was ambiguous enough while still retaining those unsettling cultural undertones that provoked such a strong reaction in people. There were the retro visuals, there was Sydney posing like a suburban dream, and then of course there was the line, "Jeans are inherited, my jeans are blue." It's meaningless, but it feels like it means something. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call strategic ambiguity. It is actually a well-documented propaganda tool when you say just enough to stir discomfort, but never enough to the point that you would ever have to take responsibility. That very simple line combined with her, combined with the culture, combined with the highly politicized atmosphere of the United States, feels like it's flirting with themes of genetics and whiteness and purity and legacy without being explicit. It sort of tickles the subconscious, it plants a little bit of unease, which is then very easily shrugged away because, hey, it's just a pun. And that's the trap. If you're offended, you're reading way too much into it. And if you're confused, you just simply didn't get the joke. But either way, you're engaging in it and they win. So then American Eagle got exactly what they wanted, which was lighting the match and becoming the center of a hyper-viral conversation with two completely opposing viewpoints, the one being that this ad was intentional fascist Nazi propaganda, and then the other side arguing that this is a hypersensitive woke mob. But regardless, both sides thought that they were making individual points when in reality they were reading off a script that was written for them by the brand, and they weren't making points, they were actually just doing American Eagle's distribution for free. They got literally hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in free earned media because of this controversy, not to mention the fact that their stock went up $400 million in 48 hours since this ad dropped. They added almost $500 million in their market cap because of this ridiculous controversy. And the most sinister part of all of this is the more intense the backlash becomes, the more innocent the brand looks. Because people on social media have an inability to form a nuanced opinion, and everything is so extreme that then American Eagle is able to release a statement, which they did today, exactly as I predicted they would, basically saying, hey everybody, relax, it was just a jeans commercial. And then all of a sudden, American Eagle is no longer the manipulator, which they absolutely are, but the victim of a woke, overreacting mob. And then there are several people on TikTok who are actually responsible for enabling companies like American Eagle to have the ability to manipulate the narrative so thoroughly because their commentary is just so extreme. For example, claiming that the CEO of American Eagle must be Adolf Hitler reincarnated, when in reality, the CEO of American Eagle is actually Jewish. Now, if this entire story sounds very familiar to you, that is because brands use this exact playbook all the time. Need I remind you, in 2017, when Kendall Jenner and Pepsi attempted to solve police brutality with a soda, it was tone deaf, it was offensive, and it was instantly pulled. However, it still helped them remain culturally relevant. They deflected the blame. They used Kendall Jenner as their sacrificial lamb, and Pepsi is doing completely fine. American Eagle did the same thing, but this time they refined the formula to not get in as much trouble as they did last time, because this was a little on the nose, and that's why you can see this ad was a little bit more ambiguous. And you can actually see how American Eagle refined this formula because they chose a celebrity in Sydney Sweeney that already had a little bit of controversy baked in, and then included a line that was uncomfortable enough to stick, but vague enough to deny. So I do believe that American Eagle will be completely fine. You know, they got their little bump. Congrats on your little bump, American Eagle. But I'm not so sure that Sydney will be. And the reason for that is that Sydney Sweeney is not a brand, she's a person. And I question the wisdom of cashing in on her relevance so early and so quickly in her career. She's quite literally the face of any brand that will have her, and you can only experience these types of levels of controversy so many times before people, and by extension brands, stop trusting you and wanting you to be the face of their products. So I believe that very real risk of cultural fatigue, combined with the fact that I don't believe that Sydney Sweeney has really proven herself to be a great actor outside of Euphoria. I've personally been very underwhelmed with all of her performances since then, and I was actually discussing this with a friend of mine, and I think the reason for that is she was so fantastic in Euphoria because she is similar to Cassie. So we all thought she was a great actress, but since then I've just not been impressed with anything. And if her acting is the medium by which she's able to make all this money for brands, but then she's not getting acting roles, she's at a risk for being replaced by someone who has retained their mystery and by extension their appeal to people, like Alexa Demi, for example. So if I were to establish a takeaway from this video, it would be for you to understand that many of you were under the false impression that you were critiquing this campaign, when in reality you were actually performing it in the exact way that they hoped that you would. We are living in a world that is so hyper-politicized and so tribal that two people can hear the exact same vague statement but walk away with completely different perceptions of it because they filtered it through their projections of reality. And then by extension, in order to be controversial, brands don't even need to take a position anymore. They just need to light the match. So be mindful of that when you are engaging with content, and then maybe pay attention to actual good marketing as opposed to cheap rage bait, which is exactly what this was.